This is Emilee Rader from Michigan State University presenting our paper, I Have a Narrow Thought Process, Constraints on Explanations Connecting Inferences and Self-Perceptions. The notice and choice model of privacy management assumes that if proper transparency is provided, then people will choose not to use platforms that have data collection and use practices they don't like. This model is based on the idea that people can control how data about them is collected and used, as long as they make informed choices about what platforms to use or avoid. In theory, this seems like it could work, but in reality, people struggle to manage their privacy. Widespread data collection and aggregation and the use of machine learning make it possible for platforms to generate inferences about users. Inferences consist of new information that's automatically derived from data the platforms collect or obtain. Most people don't have a very good understanding of what kinds of inferences can be derived or how those inferences are used. Both Facebook and Google provide a web page that shows people the inferences each platform has automatically generated about them. Inferences like these are potentially an important way for people to develop an understanding of the kinds of information it's possible for platforms to infer about users. Our study focused on people's reactions to inferences either Facebook or Google had made about them, and their explanations for why and how they thought the specific inferences were assigned to them. The way participants explain the connection, or lack of connection, they perceive between themselves and the inferences can reveal their guesses, their knowledge, and their insights about where the inferences come from. We wanted to understand what makes inferences make sense to people, why some inferences are easier for them to relate to themselves than others, and therefore, what kinds of inferences people might be able to expect or anticipate when consenting to a platform's data collection and use practices. So the first step in our study was to conduct a survey where we asked 95 respondents to rate each inference they'd been assigned by Facebook or Google on how sensible, relevant, and accurate they felt the inferences were. Only 16 of our survey respondents said they'd even seen the inferences before. We then invited 21 of the survey respondents to participate in a follow-up interview where we showed them a report, which is pictured on the right side of the slide, that presented the inferences they'd answered questions about in the survey and a summary of their ratings. The interviews focused on participants' explanations about why they thought those inferences had been assigned to them and how they'd been generated. We identified 3 broad themes in terms of the types of reactions participants had to the inferences. I'll talk briefly about each one, and there are examples from the data on the slide. Plausible reactions occurred when inferences seemed to be grounded in what participants could remember about their past actions and their perceptions of their present activities, interests, and demographics. These inferences just made sense to them. Implausible reactions happened when an inference initially seemed like it had no immediate reason why it would have been assigned. But then the participant realized that something about their past behavior or relationships might be interpreted as supporting the inference, even if it seemed like a stretch to them. No connection reactions happened when inferences just did not make any sense to participants at all. They sometimes expressed surprise or disbelief about these inferences, and they couldn't produce evidence or an explanation connecting that inference with themselves. All 21 participants said they believed that the purpose of the inferences was primarily for advertising. 17 of them appeared to accept this business model, but 20 participants said they were uncomfortable with some of the inferences assigned to them. So acceptance and discomfort coexisted for many of our participants, and sometimes even appeared in the same sentence, like in this comment from participant 22. She said, "There's a level of acceptance that it happens, but then the more you think about it, it kind of starts to disturb you a little bit more." Our study shows that plausible inferences are easier for people to understand and anticipate because they seem accurate to them and appear related to data they can envision having been collected by the platform. But inferences derived from data people can't anticipate or for purposes they're unfamiliar with would be extremely difficult for them to truly consent to. And unfortunately, telling people the inferences are used for advertising is not enough for informed consent, because in our study, participants knew this, but it still didn't help them view a broader range of inferences as plausible. So we argue that platforms should restrict the inferences they make about users to those which provoke plausible reactions, because these tend to be easily explained and understood by people based on their recent use of the platform. Thank you.